The human body is about 60% water. Take that water away, and what's left looks disturbingly like a mummy. But did you know what's truly horrifying? Japanese scientists actually put this to the test on living people. They placed people under special heating devices and recorded every single minute of their suffering. Some of these same scientists removed internal organs without anesthesia and even infected entire cities with the plague. Gender didn't matter, age didn't matter, nationality didn't matter. Anyone could end up on the operating table. These experiments were carried out by Unit 731, and they weren't done by monsters from some horror movie. They were done by ordinary people. Doctors, lab technicians, professors. So what could turn them into cold-blooded sadists? I strongly recommend not eating anything right now, because what you're about to see is the story of the most brutal medical experiments in history. And I'm going to show them to you as if it all happened yesterday. Japan wanted blood. Just 100 years ago, this country was nothing like it is today. A cult of the emperor, an obsession with greatness, and a burning desire to conquer its neighbors. Hako Ichiu, the whole world under one roof. This was the slogan of Japan at the time. It meant the divine right of the Japanese to rule the entire world. With this mindset, the military seized power in the country, and they understood a strong army needs resources: oil, coal, iron, and more. Japan had very little of its own, so it decided to take them from others. In 1931, the Japanese army invaded Manchuria, a resource-rich region in northern China. There, the Japanese created a puppet state, Manchukuo. But this was only the beginning. Japan wanted to control all of Asia and the Pacific. Japan considered the USSR, China, and the United States its enemies. These countries had larger populations, which meant larger armies. So, to defeat them, Japan would need a special kind of weapon. That mission fell to Japanese microbiologist Shiro Ishii. He studied medicine and biology at the Imperial University of Kyoto, but other students kept their distance from him. Ishii was arrogant and strange. He grew bacteria at home and treated them like pets. In the early 1920s, Ishii joined the army, became a military surgeon, and quickly built an impressive career. In 1928, the young scientist was sent on a 2-year tour of Western countries, officially as part of an exchange program, in reality for something else. During his travels, Ishii noticed that Europeans were terrified of epidemics. Not long before, Europe had been ravaged by the Spanish flu, which killed 50 million people. There was also measles, smallpox, syphilis, plague, diseases that had drained Europe for centuries. But the Japanese islands were largely untouched. During his journey, Ishii studied the effects of gas attacks in World War I. By the way, we have a video about the Great War. Be sure to check out the link in the description below. See, back then, countries attacked each other with mustard gas, phosgene, and chlorine. Then, in 1925, most countries, including Japan, signed the Geneva Protocol, banning the use of biological and chemical weapons. And Ishii came to a simple conclusion. If something is banned, it must be effective. So, he returned to Japan and began looking for like-minded allies. The military took notice. Generals Sadao Araki, Tetsuzan Nagata, and the chief surgeon of the Japanese army, Shikao Koizumi. Ishii convinced them that Japan didn't need traditional weapons made of steel and gunpowder. It needed biological weapons. They were cheaper, far more effective, and most importantly, Ishii claimed he could create them. But there were two conditions: reliable funding and permission to conduct experiments on humans in order to obtain accurate results. The military loved the idea of biological weapons, so they went to Emperor Hirohito and told him about a weapon that would make Japan great. Hirohito gave his approval. In 1932, a secret project appears, Project Togo, led by Shiro Ishii. The first Togo laboratory is created inside the Zhongma fortress, near the city of Harbin in Manchuria, so that if a dangerous substance ever leaked, Japanese civilians would not be affected. And besides, it was easier to find materials for experiments here. Criminals, bandits, homeless people, Chinese partisans, and political prisoners were brought to the laboratory. They are delivered by the Kempeitai, Japan's military police, something like the Nazi Gestapo. They abduct people from Manchuria and neighboring countries. Most of the project's victims were Koreans, Russians, and Mongolians. At first, prisoners are fed well. Rice, meat, fish, sometimes they're even given alcohol. The Japanese want their subjects to feel healthy, and then they infect them with different diseases, most often the plague, all to observe how the human body reacts. But the first serious problems soon appear. In the fall of 1934, several dozen prisoners escape. What happens to them afterwards is unknown, but the Japanese fear they may be exposed. A year later, an explosion occurs at the fortress where the lab is located. Why it happened is also unclear. Maybe it was the work of the Chinese partisans. They had no intention of tolerating occupation. At one point, a number of wells used by Japanese troops were contaminated with cholera. As a result, 6,000 soldiers died. Because of this, Shiro Ishii decides to relocate and start over. The project moves to Pingfang in the same region of Manchuria. Here, the Japanese build a new complex hidden behind a 3-meter-high wall. Inside are laboratories, prisons, and housing for staff. On paper, it's called the Water Supply and Epidemic Prevention Department. Supposedly, its mission is to ensure Japanese soldiers drink clean water and cannot be poisoned by Chinese partisans. But in reality, this is a research center known as Unit 731. It secretly develops biological and chemical weapons for Japan. People from many professions are recruited to work here, mostly doctors and scientists. Each year, Unit 731 receives 10 million yen, about 86 million US dollars in today's money. Employees are promised high salaries and the chance to conduct revolutionary research. Most of them gladly agree, but very few understand what truly awaits them. What happened inside the walls of Unit 731 is an extremely brutal and disturbing story. If you're sensitive to this kind of content, you may want to skip to this time code. For those who choose to stay, buckle up. So, it's 1937. Japan launches an invasion into China. The war is going well, and thousands of Chinese civilians and soldiers are taken prisoner, which means Japanese scientists suddenly have no shortage of human test subjects. Unit 731 is only the tip of the iceberg. Across the occupied territories, an entire network of similar laboratories is created. Unit 1855 in Beijing, Unit 1644 in Nanjing, Unit 8604 in Guangzhou, and many more. Altogether, between 10,000 and 20,000 people work in these units, and all of them answer to one man, Shiro Ishii. One day, while the Japanese are building another laboratory in Pingfang, local residents ask what's being constructed. The Japanese reply, a sawmill. Later, one of the scientists jokes, and people are the logs. After that, test subjects really do start being called logs. Workers casually say things like, oh, how many logs did we cut today? Or, oh, are fresh logs arriving? For them, it becomes part of everyday life. The experiments carried out by Unit 731 can roughly be divided into two categories. The first, studying the effects of bacteria, viruses, and gases on the human body. The second, experiments performed directly on the body itself. Prisoners are deliberately infected with plague, typhus, cholera, anthrax, and syphilis. Then they're observed, how long they survive, how the disease progresses, and how it spreads. At first, infections are delivered through ordinary injections. But then the Japanese realize, on a real battlefield, you won't be chasing enemies with a syringe. So they begin looking for other methods, and the experiments only grow more cruel. The scientists force infected prisoners to have sex with healthy people, to see whether diseases are transmitted sexually. If a woman becomes pregnant, they also observe how the disease affects the unborn child. Most of these illnesses destroy internal organs. Unit staff want to see this destruction in real time, so they perform vivisections, surgeries without anesthesia. Organs are cut out of living people and taken for study. Often these vivisections are carried out by inexperienced surgeons using human beings as training materials, so they can practice and become more hardened for future military service. And these kind of experiments aren't limited to Unit 731. Imperial Japanese Army surgeon Ken Yuasa later said that vivisection was common practice amongst military doctors in China. At least 1,000 Japanese medical personnel performed such operations in occupied territories. We did this more for practice than for research. It was routine. We needed to train. The Japanese didn't just want to study diseases. They wanted to turn them into weapons, and weapons must be tested. So, prisoners are soon transported to testing grounds. Tied to wooden posts and planes drop bombs filled with various substances on them. First from far away, then closer, then even closer. Afterward, the victims are taken to field operating rooms and subjected to vivisection. The Japanese also test conventional weapons. They drop aerial bombs on people. They test flamethrowers on them. Then they would attempt to treat the survivors, trying to determine which wounds are fatal and which ones can be healed. And the more the Japanese experiment, the more they realize that no one is going to stop them. Before long, experiments are carried out purely out of curiosity. For example, they swap a person's left and right arms, they pump human bodies with horse blood or dog blood, or they test how much pain a person can endure and where the breaking point lies. The Japanese try to justify this in different ways. Former members of the unit later claimed that these experiments were meant to make warfare easier for their soldiers. After all, Japan wasn't only planning to fight China, they were also preparing for war against the Soviet Union in Siberia. And Siberia meant snow, icy winds, and minus 40 degrees Celsius. The Japanese were not accustomed to such temperatures. They wanted to know how long a human body can survive in extreme cold, and what treatments worked best for frostbite. These experiments were led by Hisato Yoshimura, a man even his colleagues secretly called the Devil and a cold-blooded beast. Yoshimura would take prisoners outside during the harshest freezing temperatures and watch how long they lasted. Or he would submerge their hands and feet in ice water, wait until they froze, and then strike them with a wooden stick. Witnesses recalled that the sound resembled hitting a wooden board. After this, Yoshimura would order some prisoners to rub the skin, others to warm it near a fire, and others to place it in warm water. This is how the Japanese discovered that warm water worked best for frostbite. But if the water was too hot, the skin would simply slide off the bone. In addition to all this, prisoners were starved and denied water. Japanese doctors observed and recorded everything that happened. First came dry mouth, then hallucinations, and finally, death. What interested Japanese scientists the most was how long a person could survive without water in a hot environment. So they locked prisoners in chambers with hot air blowing constantly and watched dehydration take its course. Eventually they noticed that after death, these bodies weighed 5 times less than they had before. People were also placed in special chambers where air pressure was altered. This caused prisoners' eyes to bulge from their sockets and internal organs to be forced out through every possible opening. Others were strapped into centrifuges and spun until death. All of this was meant to understand what Japanese paratroopers and pilots might face. Unit 731 also conducted blood experiments. Prisoners had about half a liter of blood drained every 2 to 3 days. Doctors wanted to see whether the body could replenish its supply at that time. They quickly found out it could not. But the horrors didn't end there. In Unit 731, prisoners were electrocuted, crushed to death with heavy objects, buried alive. They were fed poison, injected with narcotics, forced to inhale toxic gases, exposed to X-rays over and over, and everything was carefully documented. Every scream, every word. Those who survived all of this were poisoned with potassium cyanide or chloroform. On average, prisoners lived here about 2 months. But the unit operated like an assembly line. The cells were never empty. The military police, the Kempeitai, constantly delivered new logs, and those already used were burned in crematoriums. This was a one-way road. Not a single prisoner ever escaped. The territory was guarded by soldiers, movement was only allowed under supervision, and only where permitted. No one could enter or leave unnoticed. Prisoners were transported blindfolded, always at night, and always in special vehicles. When such a vehicle arrived at the main gate, one driver stepped out, went to the guard room, and reported that he had delivered people. The guard then called the special team, commanded by Shiro Ishii's brother. The special team functioned as an internal security unit. Even the staff of the complex were afraid of them. Next, the prisoners were led through an underground tunnel beneath the facade of the main building and taken into an internal prison. Women and children were separated. men held at an entirely different part of the facility altogether. After that, everyone went through a medical examination. To perform experiments on a person, they had to be completely healthy. After the examination, each prisoner was assigned a 3-digit number. There was at least one known attempt to escape from this place. Information about the incident is scarce and different sources describe it differently. But after World War II, a former Japanese soldier claimed that one day, a prisoner attacked a scientist using a door handle. He burst out of his cell, ran down the corridor, and even managed to grab the keys and unlock several other cells. People broke free, but guards quickly opened fire and killed them. Japanese writer Seiichi Morimura later revealed new details in his book, The Devil's Feast. According to him, 2 Russian prisoners once staged a distraction. One of them lay on the ground pretending to be sick and vomiting. When a guard entered to check, the other attacked him. They managed to remove their handcuffs, seize the keys, and start opening other cells. But in the end, they were discovered and executed on the spot. Even if the prisoners had made it outside, they would still have to face a 3-meter-high brick wall, and beyond that, a moat lined with an electrified fence. By now, you probably realize that nearly all personnel of this unit were unhinged maniacs and sadists. There's one story where laboratory workers showed at least a small trace of humanity. It was described by journalist and historian Hal Gold in his book Unit 731, Testimony. One technician in the unit, Makoto Ishibashi, secretly began communicating with 2 prisoners, a young Chinese woman and a Ukrainian woman. They told him that since their capture, they had never seen their own reflections and begged him to bring them a mirror. After that, the technician stopped speaking to them and disappeared. But one day, they noticed that someone had quietly slipped a small mirror into their cell. May 1939, the Mongolian steppe not far from the Khalkhyngol River. Soviet and Japanese forces are standing face to face, preparing for what will become known as the Nomonhan Incident. For both the USSR and Japan, this moment is a live fire test for their armies. What Soviet commanders don't know is that the Japanese have prepared something special for this battle, a secret unit. A unit meant to attack the USSR with biological weapons. Under cover of darkness, a group of Japanese saboteurs sneak to a water source used by Soviet soldiers and contaminate it with typhoid bacteria. But the attack barely leaves a mark. Only a small number of people become infected. The Soviets suspect nothing. Most likely, Shiro Ishii already knew this operation wouldn't cause major damage. This was more of a demonstration for Japan's high command. Ishii shows that his research works. It just needs more funding and more experiments to become truly effective. In the end, Japan loses at Khalkhyngol. After that, Japanese strategy shifts. Instead of focusing north towards the Soviet Union, they turn southeast towards the United States. Ishii studies the failure at Khalkhyngol and starts searching for a better way to deliver biological weapons. Now, the Japanese stop targeting water. Instead, they contaminate candy and sweets, then hand them out to Chinese children. The diseases spread fast. Local doctors have no idea how to treat them. At that time, bacteria is still poorly understood, especially strains engineered specifically to kill. Soon the Japanese decide sweets are also ineffective. They need something capable of infecting an entire city quickly. At first, Unit 731 considers infecting stray dogs. They wander through cities unnoticed. But that would require capturing huge numbers of dogs. They would need to be housed, fed, and transported. Completely impractical. So, Unit 731's biologists propose another solution: breeding plague-infected fleas, infecting rats with them, and releasing the rats into cities. They can crawl almost anywhere. And history proves this method works. The Black Death spread in exactly this way during the Middle Ages. But soon, this idea is also abandoned. Eventually, Japanese planners decide the best option is bacteriological bombs. They can be easily dropped from aircraft. Between 1940 and 1943, Japan tests multiple types of these bombs. To protect the bacteria from blasts, the shells are made with porcelain casings. In total, Japan conducts 12 major tests and attacks 11 Chinese cities. The largest attack occurs in 1941 in the city of Chengde. 10,000 Chinese civilians die of cholera. and another 17,000 Japanese soldiers also die, either because they were never warned about the operation or because they didn't take it seriously. In addition to bacterial bombs, planes dropped contaminated food and clothing. One of China's leaders at the time, Chiang Kai-shek, documents these attacks and sends the evidence to US President Franklin Roosevelt. But Roosevelt keeps the information classified. In general, America isn't especially focused on Asia. That's about to change. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks the American base at Pearl Harbor. The United States officially enters World War II. Unit 731 sees this as an opportunity for new experiments. And even though Americans and Japanese are fighting primarily at sea, Japan still looks for ways to use biological weapons against the United States. In 1944, Japan launches about 9,000 balloon bombs carrying conventional explosives towards the US. Only about 200 make it to American soil, killing just 7 people. For Japanese leadership, that result is disappointing. So they consider loading the bombs with biological agents instead. But the idea is rejected. In late July 1944, the operation is canceled by Hideki Tojo, one of the leaders who helped start the war. He fears that such an attack would only make things worse. Tojo is convinced that America is also developing biological weapons, and that the balloon operation would give them free rein to do the same. He probably never expected that the United States would drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan, but that's another story. Even after that, the Japanese army still tries to use biological weapons against the US. In the spring of 1944, America is preparing to invade the Pacific island of Saipan. Japan learns about the plan and dispatches a submarine carrying unknown bacteria, but the submarine is sunk. By the very end of the war, when Japan is already doomed and US bombers are leveling its cities, the Japanese decide to go all in. History records an operation with a poetic name, Cherry Blossoms at Night. According to the plan, Japanese aircraft would launch from submarine aircraft carriers near the US coast and strike America directly. The goal is to infect the west coast of the United States with plague, cholera, typhoid, and other diseases. Even the submarine crews themselves are supposed to be infected. They're ordered to reach American shores and deliver the diseases in their own bodies. But opposition to the plan emerges inside Japan. The operation is approved, then canceled, then reconsidered, but in the end, Japan simply runs out of time. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber drops the atomic bomb Little Boy on Hiroshima. The city becomes a scorched wasteland. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and sends its troops into Manchuria. And the next day, a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, falls on Nagasaki. Japanese leadership quickly realizes the war is lost. On August 9th, the General Staff in Tokyo sends a message to Unit 731 ordering all evidence destroyed. Several hundred prisoners sitting in cells receive their final meal. Poison is added to the food. Those who refuse to eat are shot or gassed. 600 Chinese laborers who worked as support staff marched into the courtyard and lined up in front of a machine gun. All bodies are burned in the crematorium. At the same time, Japanese soldiers destroy Unit 731's archives. Thousands of pages of reports, photographs, experimental records, almost everything is burned. Then they move on to the equipment. Anything that can be removed is taken away. Anything that can't be moved is blown up along with the buildings. Japanese personnel are issued cyanide capsules in case they are captured by Soviet troops. Before dispersing, they're given 3 final orders: tell no one, hold no official positions, and never contact each other again. Most lower-level staff flee to Japan by any means they can. They try to disappear among the thousands of soldiers returning home from the front. When Soviet troops enter the territory of Unit 731, they find ruins. Some buildings have survived the explosions. Investigators discover traces of crematoriums, remnants of laboratories, and surgical instruments. The USSR pushes forward, occupying Manchuria and entering Korea. And on September 2nd, aboard the American battleship Missouri, a Japanese delegation signs the instrument of surrender. World War II is over. American forces occupy Japan. Among them is Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, a microbiologist working at the US Army's Biological Warfare Center. He has a special mission: to uncover everything about Japan's biological weapons program. The problem is, Sanders doesn't even know where to start. He's never even heard of Unit 731. Shiro Ishii and his associates are arrested, but they refuse to talk. So, Sanders tells them something along the lines of, "If you don't tell us everything, we'll invite the Soviet Union to join the investigation." Those words work like a magic spell. The next morning, a thick report is lying on Sanders' desk, detailing the full operations of Unit 731. The lieutenant colonel passes the documents to General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the Allied Occupation Forces in Japan. The time for punishment has come. The International Military Tribunal begins in Tokyo. Former leaders of Japan are put on trial. They're accused of planning and waging an aggressive war, carrying out mass murders of civilians, and killing prisoners of war. Among the defendants is Hideki Tojo, former prime minister, one of the architects of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the man who once canceled a planned biological attack on the United States. Americans would learn about this only half a century later. Tojo is executed, along with 6 other war criminals. 16 more are sentenced to life in prison. One of the prosecutors briefly mentions Japanese experiments with poisonous serums, but because there's no hard evidence, these crimes are never proven. Throughout the entire tribunal, no one mentions Unit 731. It's as though it never existed. The reason is that Douglas MacArthur offers Shiro Ishii a deal. All information about Japan's biological research in exchange for immunity. Ishii agrees, because during their retreat, the Japanese did not manage to destroy everything. American intelligence monitors the mail of former Unit 731 employees and taps their phone calls, but not to uncover their crimes. They simply want to make sure this valuable information does not fall into Soviet hands. See, after World War II, the United States and the USSR become enemies. The Cold War begins, and biological weapons could become a powerful bargaining chip. Soon, the Soviet Union realizes the Americans have cut them out of the deal. In December 1949, in Khabarovsk, the communists hold their own trial of 12 Japanese military officers and scientists. They're charged with developing and using biological weapons, and the Japanese defendants confess to everything. In the end, they receive sentences ranging from 2 to 25 years in labor camps. By Soviet standards, that's basically a gift. And soon the Japanese are released altogether. By the late 1950s, they're all back home. Most likely, Soviet scientists also obtained information about the experiments, because not long after, a secret facility appears in Sverdlovsk, a site eerily similar to Unit 731. Biological weapons are secretly developed there, and it eventually ends in an anthrax outbreak. While the epidemic is spreading, the USSR reassures Western countries, claiming it's merely a minor problem with some spoiled meat. The United States refuses to recognize the Khabarovsk trials. They label them as communist propaganda. In response, the Soviet Union accuses America of protecting war criminals in exchange for their knowledge. In short, both superpowers exploit the tragedy for their own benefit. The decision not to prosecute Shiro Ishii and other scientists has devastating consequences. Around the world, similar research accelerates with renewed intensity. Today, at least 17 countries are suspected of developing biological weapons, and all of them, on the surface, agree such weapons are horrific, but we still want them, just in case. In other words, while the USSR and the United States trade accusations, the main architect of the experiments, Shiro Ishii, continues to live as a free man. In 1948, he officially receives immunity from the Americans. After that, his trial goes cold. Some historians claim the scientist flew to the United States and assisted the Pentagon with biological weapons programs. Others say he remained in Japan. The only thing we know for certain concerns Ishii's final years. Towards the end of his life, he suffers from throat cancer. He dies from it on October 9, 1959 at the age of 67. The funeral is organized by Masaji Kitano, former deputy and later director of Unit 731. Kitano, by the way, is never prosecuted either. After the war, he works at the Ministry of Education and becomes head of the pharmaceutical company Green Cross. Kitano also helped the Americans supply blood for transfusions during the Korean War, and later died of old age. But one of Shiroishi's main patrons, Shikaiko Koizumi, chose a different path. When the Americans were already preparing to arrest him, he committed seppuku, a traditional Japanese suicide. He slit open his own stomach and died like a samurai. The rest of Unit 731 scientists were never punished either. On the contrary, they went on to build successful careers. Some even published scientific papers based on their experiments. In those papers, they claimed the experiments were conducted not on humans, but on Manchurian monkeys. Perhaps the most successful of all was Hisato Yoshimura, the very devil who froze people's arms and legs. He developed a frostbite resistance index that brought him international recognition. In 1978, Emperor Hirohito personally awarded Yoshimura the Order of the Rising Sun 3rd Class for innovative work in environmental adaptation science. This is what adaptation looked like, in case you forgot. And yes, Emperor Hirohito himself remained in power after World War II, even though it was he who signed the document authorizing human experimentation. But the Americans decided that Emperor Hirohito was a symbol of Japanese stability who could help them control the country. He was considered a puppet in the hands of the military, so he stayed on the throne until his death in 1989. Public discussion of Japan's dark past began only in the 1980s and 90s. Former workers started sharing stories about their involvement openly or anonymously. In August 2002, the Tokyo District Court officially acknowledged for the first time that Japan had in fact used biological weapons, but it rejected the demand to pay compensation to victims. In 2018, Japan's National Archives finally declassified the names of all 3,607 members of Unit 731. Everyone now knew the criminals' names, even though most of these criminals were long dead. We still do not know exactly how many people Unit 731 killed. According to different estimates, between 3,000 and 14,000 prisoners were tortured to death inside laboratories. 70% of them were Chinese, and between 200,000 and 500,000 civilians died as a result of biological attacks on cities. Prisoners of Unit 731 came from all over the world. One former worker later recalled seeing the bodies of a Britishman, a Frenchman, and an American inside glass tanks that were preserved in formaldehyde. We also know for certain that Slavs were among the prisoners. The city of Harbin was founded by Russian settlers whom the Japanese could have take directly from the streets. While watching this video, you've probably asked yourself more than once, why do people do such things? Why did the staff witness such horrifying crimes against humanity and stay silent? Why did everyone ignore Unit 731 even after the war? In the 1990s, a New York Times journalist tracked down a 72-year-old Japanese farmer who had worked as a medic in Unit 731. He said, "I operated on a living test subject while he was screaming. Vivisection must be performed under normal conditions. If we had used anesthesia, it would have affected the organs and blood vessels we were studying." When the journalist asked about experiments on children, the farmer calmly replied, "Of course experiments were conducted on children, but most likely their parents were spies." Finally, the man added, "There is a possibility this could happen again, because in wars, you have to win." Because of testimonies like these, for a long time, historians explained the crimes of Unit 731 by saying that scientists and doctors did not see their victims as human beings, that they were working for the state and in the name of science. But in recent years, this version has been increasingly criticized. Because what real benefit did science gain from burying people alive? In truth, the scientific value of Unit 731's experiments was minimal at best. The only genuinely useful discovery was a method for treating frostbite, and that's it. Some of the experiments had no value even for the military. For example, how did it help the Japanese army to know what happens if you connected the esophagus directly to the intestines? I'll tell you, it didn't help at all. So what motivated scientists to do this? Modern psychologists call this morbid curiosity. It's the same trait that makes you watch horror movies at night, or listen to true crime podcasts about serial killers, or slow down at the sight of a car crash to see what happened. For an evolutionary perspective, this curiosity helped our ancestors survive, because the more you know about something painful and unpleasant, the better your chances are at avoiding it. Besides morbid curiosity, people are also prone to something called obedience to authority. This is clearly demonstrated by the Milgram experiment. Participants agreed to administer electric shocks to people behind a wall, who were actually actors. And they did shock them, simply because a man in a white lab coat kept telling them, "The experiment must continue," or "Everything is under control." Just to be clear, participants increased the voltage to levels that would be fatal, even when the actor behind the wall begged them to stop. Add to this, conformity. The desire to be like everybody else. Imagine you're an ordinary surgeon who receives an invitation to join a secret government organization. Good salary, prestige, experience. Would you really be able to tell thousands of colleagues who also received such offers that this is wrong? On top of that, people feared for their lives. Refuse to be a surgeon, then you become a test subject. There was one case where a Unit 731 employee, Yoshio Sudo, accidentally became infected with plague, and instead of being treated, he was subjected to vivisection himself. Research into the psychological causes of this kind of behavior began relatively recently. We'll leave several interesting materials on this topic in the description below. You can read them to understand the issue more deeply. But if everything described above really explains this horror, then the problem with the crimes of World War II was not the Japanese, the Germans, or any other nation, because all humans are born the same. There are no inborn killers or thieves, only tendencies that may or may not be activated. In that case, the main problem lies in the system itself, one that suppresses a person's will and character, one that encourages violence and shifts responsibility onto orders from above. And let's not forget that the human brain is still poorly understood. When people are given free rein and moral restraints are removed, it can show us anything. Thank you again, as always, my friends, for sticking around till the end. Please feel free to drop us a like, subscribe to see more content, and feel free to comment below about what topics you'd like to see discussed next. As a growing channel, we always appreciate your support. This has been Yesterday. We'll see you next time.